Hi everybody, welcome to Hornbrook, California. I'm Uncle Matthew and today I'm going to be teaching you the basics of wood carving. So let's get started. Welcome to my humble workshop. This is where all the magic happens. These are the tools that you're going to need to do this project. Today I'm going to teach you to safely handle a carving chisel and familiarize you with wood grain and how to work with it. Now, the first thing we need to do is make sure our workspace is clear. We also want to give ourselves enough space so that if our chisel were to slip, it wouldn't hurt anybody. I call this space your flight path. And I tell my students, every time you put a chisel to wood, ask yourself, if this chisel slipped, where would it go? So always make sure your flight path is clear. Safety is paramount. I've taught wood shop and wood carving to students as young as 9 years old and never had an injury. Follow my instructions and you'll never see the inside of an emergency room getting your arteries sewn up. Over many decades of experience wood carving, I've come up with a few rules that I teach all my students. Rule number 1, always clamp your work down solidly and use all the clamps you need to do so. You need 2 hands for wood carving. Never ever hold the work in your hand or in your lap to carve. This is the best way to impale yourself. Rule number 2, keep both hands firmly on the tool and planted to something stationary. Remember, you can never cut yourself as long as you have both hands on your chisel. If you've ever played pool, you can use a similar technique by planting the edge of your hand firmly on the table and using it as an anchor and still have 2 fingers to hold the chisel. This is your fail-safe. Never ever carve without your anchor. Use enough pressure so that if someone were to bump into you, they wouldn't move your elbow. Rule number 3, never carve towards yourself. This shouldn't need to be explained. You carve towards yourself, you just might end up with 2 belly buttons. The only time you should ever have a chisel pointing at you is when I'm doing it. Now that you know enough not to kill yourself, let's move on to wood grain. What is wood grain? Wood grain is the fibers in a board that run roughly parallel to the vertical axis of the log from which it was sawn. Under a microscope, you could see that these fibers are actually tubes that run the length of the tree and carry water and nutrients up from the roots. Did you know that you really can blow air through a solid piece of red oak? It's true. That's because the coarse-grained wood has larger cells. Basswood has almost no grain, making it ideal for carving. When we actually start carving wood, that's the kind of wood I'm going to ask you to get. Now let's move on to working with grain. Wood grain can be a difficult thing to understand, and the best way to get familiar with it is to practice carving in different directions and learn how to go with the grain. This diagram shows 4 cardinal carving directions and can be used as a guide to carving along the grain. The circle is divided into 4 quadrants by making 2 perpendicular lines, one of which is perpendicular to the grain of the wood. The other is perpendicular to that, creating a cross. This helps us map out which directions we need to carve. Using the guide, you can draw direction lines on your work to keep you going the right way. So if I were to carve in the wrong direction and go against the grain, I'm much more likely to chip off a piece and mess up my project. So using a practice piece on which to carve in different directions will help you better understand how to interact with the grain, because although wood has different densities, they all share the same characteristics. We can go against the grain in another video, but for now we're going to focus on going with the grain. Get yourself a 3/4 inch thick square piece of wood, about 10 inches square, and find yourself a pot lid or something circular and mark a circle onto your board. Then cut it out with any tool that'll do the job. Ideally, you'd want to use a bandsaw. If you don't have a bandsaw, maybe you can get a jigsaw or a coping saw. Whatever will do the job. Now draw your lines, making sure that according to my chart, your horizontal line is perpendicular to the grain. Now clamp it down to your workbench and get a 5/8 inch curved chisel called a gouge. You can also use a flat chisel. Now you're going to carve a 45-degree angle called a bevel into the top edge of your circle in the directions that I indicate on my chart. To do this, use your finger along the outer edge of the circle as a guide and draw a parallel line to mark the edge of your bevel. Once you've carved each quadrant, you should have a beveled edge along the entire perimeter of your circle. Finally, we'll cover our work in tung oil. You can apply a thin coating with either a brush or a rag. Let it dry for 15 minutes, wipe it off, and give it about 12 hours to cure. Add coats to your liking. This oil comes from the tung tree and has been used for thousands of years. And when it dries, it creates a hardened, waterproof, protective coating that will keep your wood looking great for many years. And that's it. Now you can use your first handmade wood carving as a trivet to place hot plates on and pots while you're serving your favorite meal at dinner. Thank you so much for joining me today. I hope you had a lot of fun. I'm Uncle Matthew, and until next time, happy carving.